Everything is up for grabs right now. I think everything is in flux, right? Whether it be commercial models, whether it is who does what jobs, how do we do those jobs?
Garbage in, garbage out, right? But it's no different, I think, in this situation, because good vibes in gives you good systems out.
Fashion away in an agile manner, on a program is probably an example. With AI, is an example of doing the wrong thing better.
All of our capabilities, including configuration mining, agent finding, not to mention all the other metadata analysis we provide with syncing and org, to anyone. Anyone can start for free, and actually the only paid tier for self-service is around $100 a user a month, just to make it completely accessible, even if you're an admin in a small org or an enterprise. Just
take my money.
Yeah.
Take my
He's
money.
already getting his wallet out.
Take my money.
Sam, Matt, thank you for joining us today. Would you care to tell the listeners and viewers a bit more about what you do and
Should I go first, or do you want to go
I think you should
I'll
tell
go
us
first.
your life story, Sam. That'd be great.
So, for those who don't know me, out there in listener world, I am a director.
If you've been living under the rock and you don't know Sam.
Yeah. I am a Salesforce architect, and been working with CRM technologies consulting world only for probably the past 20 years, which feels like a long time, 14 of which have been Salesforce specifically. And I'm a Salesforce CTA, so certified technical architect, and typically as a director within our PwC customer-led transformation practice, I'm sort of involved in the larger scale implementations that involve Salesforce and other technologies as well. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
I would have to say this is a very British presentation, because you said I'm a Salesforce architect, where I think of you as the Salesforce architect at PwC.
Well, there's
but you can't say this.
Right? So
I'll
I can't
say
say I'm the architect.
That's sorry, Matt.
Oh, I'm not sure if I can follow that. So, yeah, I'll go and launch into my standard introduction, right, that you do on every Teams call, right? So, hi, I'm Matthew Morris. I'm the Salesforce CTO at Capgemini in the UK. I've been working in the Salesforce ecosystem since about 2009, and 15 years before that, when I started my career in 1994, I've seen the moves through mainframe, web, mobile, before I finally arrived at the cloud. So it's interesting to see the repeating patterns that are happening now. Mm-hmm. My work day to day, I'm more of a hand-waving architect, I would say, these days. There's been so many changes in Salesforce, I'm not entirely sure I could tell you how everything absolutely works these days. But I think that, my work within Capgemini, it's part of our digital customer experience practice. And we are looking at that CX stack, which, there is a lot of Salesforce, and Salesforce has done really well over the last 15, 20 years in terms of their footprint across organizations. I expect we'll talk today about, some of the challenges now at this time of disruption that sort of fill my working week.
And for formality, I'm Xavier Lishinsky. I'm Chief Product Officer at Elements Cloud, a change intelligence tool for the Salesforce product. Actually, can I ask, you mentioned when you were talking about your career, a lot of, so you said standards and patterns, re-emerging, repeating patterns. Now with all this AI extravaganza, explosion happening, what are some of the old and tested truths that you see, being important all over again?
It's very excuse me, it's very early on in the podcast for me to start be launching into all that patter. But yeah, I'll give it a go. I've reflected a lot over the last couple of years, as to what the lessons from the past are, right? And I think, to kind of keep this little bit brief, right? If you think about where you were and what you were doing and how you lived your life in, let's say, 1996, 1997, right? You probably did have a mobile phone. You may or may not have turned it off between calls. Your mum probably definitely did turn it on and off between calls. And, the internet was being referred to as the information superhighway, and everybody was like, this is going to change the world. But nobody really knew how. and then there were a lot of hype then ensued. We had .com, and it was only after that hype curve had peaked and then fallen off, and the disruption, we actually began to see what the patterns were in terms of what does it mean, what does the internet actually mean within society, right? And main example, I guess, would be I can remember commuting when my son was born, so that's like 2005. And I had a Nokia early smartphone, but I mean, it was very pixelated. There was no video. If you'd have told me that within a decade I'd be streaming high quality video and not worrying about the cost, whilst I commuted, I would like, sounds possible, but I can't imagine myself doing it. And I think that is very much like the situation now. We all know that this is a big deal, but actually it's going to take a few other events, I think, before we understand what it actually means.
So many.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the elephant in the room is AI, right? That's what we're referring to as the new shift or the most recent shift, and the concept of agents, agentic use cases, more automation, more intelligence, things like that. I think the crux of it is we've always had those things, right? But we've had them in different forms previously. We've always had intelligence. It was just buried in people. Okay. We've always had ways of automating things. It was just buried in robots, at the time, that were more mechanical than they are electronic today. So I think just sort of echoing what your point there is that even though the technology has changed and the mechanisms for doing things have changed, we're still trying to solve similar problems to what we had before. We just got more tools to be able to do it now.
Are we though? Because to a degree, I think I agree with you. But wouldn't you say that artificial intelligence, especially through large language models, and then their application in various agentic frameworks, whether that's Agentforce, N8.8, or others that you can customize yourself, are actually allowing you now to fix problems that you never knew were solvable before? I mean, we had an interesting case. We've built an internal agent to help with case analysis and creation and documentation of bugs for developers. And the interesting thing is, until that technology arrived, we always thought the solution is training of the people, and then more training. And if they really suck at it, then you just keep waving your finger and saying, no, you need to, and retraining. And now it's a button.
Yeah.
And just you click that button, it will do everything for you. And don't think, just do it. It will probably do it better most of the time than you would ever do with all the training. And isn't it the case that it's actually?
I partially agree in the sense that with tools that are capable of doing a certain amount, you can focus on the known knowns and the known unknowns. The unknown unknowns have always been a challenge. As the tools have progressed, then, such as Elements and other tools, the unknowns you're able to make them into knowns, which may be challenges that you didn't realize you had, but you didn't know you had those problems in the first place. So I guess surfacing those is more prevalent these days and easier to do, but it's because the tools are more capable that is enabling that.
You're opening all the cans of worms here. So, all right. So, here's a few more points on that then. So, I think let's start with, the utility of AI, right? Never mind the productivity. Let's think about the utility of it. And I think it really depends, at least in my experience, what mode you're operating in. So in terms of case discovery, case analysis, that's like a discovery mode, let's call it, right? So you're not being very prescriptive about what you want. You're kind of giving some, hey, I think, take a look at this. Tell me what you think. Is it similar to this, right? And that mode seems to work quite well. I get quite good results with that, right? This sort of, act of discovering, stuff that I didn't know, or, actually just being able to have something that's able to handle and marshal all those data points that my brain, of course, just can't handle. But I would contrast that with the other end of the spectrum, which is, I think the term is vibe coding, apparently, right? But apparently it's got a name now. This is how I've always coded, which is, you don't read the instruction manual, you just start smashing your head against it until you can make it work. But this is where, for example, I was doing, I haven't done any .NET for, 10 or 15 years. So I was trying to do some sort of a serverless, function that that basically sort of gave me access to calendar information, right? So really, really simple, pretty straightforward about the format that I wanted. But it was a real battle because it kept hallucinating as to what version of the .NET framework it was, where there were library compatibilities. Was I running it local? Was it running on Azure? And, that, was a big cause of frustration, right? And that's where, you kind of, when you correct it, of course, you get that even the most infuriating thing about all of AI, which is, you're right. And you're like, yeah, I know I'm right. I was hoping you would not take me down that road. So it's kind of a really extreme contrast in terms of like discovering and actually being very specific. I've had experiences which are far better on the discovery than on the being specific. And I think the sweet spot for me certainly is in like creative writing, right? When you're as you can hear, I can talk verbosely. Oh, it's perfect for summarization, right? So and especially now with the voice mode, so that sort of those creative pursuits, fantastic. But actually, if I've got engineering to do and actually it's got to work exactly in the right way, it's not that different from actually, needing to understand algorithms. And that's how we used to solve, problems in the past. And then I think, I'm sure we'll get more into this, right? At a slightly larger scale, wouldn't typically call it an algorithm, but the idea of business processes, right? Which is, where Elements, has got, a big, a big interest. This is, again, a really interesting time because we can certainly use AI to discover what's out there. And I think over the last 15 years or so, we've all had a fantastic time in the Salesforce world. It's been so much fun. We have created and created and created. Yeah. So there's certainly a lot of stuff to analyze. But then we've kind of got to get into, okay, well, what are the business processes that we need now? And I think that's going to be an interesting challenge to, where things actually now, again, have to move more towards the specific, and it needs to be exactly like this. So, I'm looking to explore that, in the near future, I think.
So it's quite interesting. Salesforce at Dreamforce is launching AI Coding, their own vibe coding tool. Obviously, vibe coding we've had for a while. And people have been, whether that's through Bolts, Lovabolts, CoreSource, all these other tools outside of the Salesforce ecosystem, they've been announcing the death of developers for the last year and a half. People will be able to build production-based applications by just putting their ideas and dreams on virtual paper. But actually, we don't see that many of any known success stories of proper production-based tools, as far as I know, done through vibe coding. And actually, do you think this is because the premise of vibe coding is fundamentally flawed, or the technology isn't there? What I mean by that is we will get there potentially in a couple of years as the technology progresses, or is it this technology might be even perfect today, but AI will never on its own replace analysis, and to your point, specific what you need, what you want, AI will not automatically read your brain.
So I quite like the sort of tempered consideration of that. Is that the old principle, and I say old principle because it is back when technology and architecture was in its infancy, probably around the beginning of the internet and the early stages, was garbage in, garbage out, right? But it's no different, I think, in this situation, because in an analogy, well, vibes in, good vibes in, gives you good systems out, right? And it's no different in that regard. I sort of see. So, direct answer to your question, I think we will get there, okay, with vibe coding. But it's not going to eliminate the need for
The good vibes.
the way the good vibes, right? The way of operating it, and the way of operating it is with very sort of clear and precise specification. I don't mean down to the nth level of detail, but very clear instructions, right? And you know, that's not just one instruction; it's a brief in a way, as if you would give that to an intern. So I see that, you know, AI agentic use cases, whether it be for vibe coding or whatever, is like a brilliant intern, right? You can give them some instructions, but they'll only produce brilliant work if you give them very targeted instructions. So I do take your point about the algorithm, but I don't think it has to be sort of specced out in as much detail as an algorithm would typically have been, or as detailed. I think, you know, what needs to happen is it needs to be grounded. The instructions need to be grounded in, you know, the current state, right? That might be in the way the business works, the policies and regulations that it needs to consider, the quality of the code that it needs to produce. If it's, you know, if it's going to produce I think the example that was demonstrated most recently was build me an application in Salesforce that does uses some Lightning components and is able to then test it and so on. It needs to adhere to your coding standards and your well-architected standards and so on and so forth. But you've got to give those instructions as part of the, you know, the vibe, if you will, in order to get something that is worthwhile out. Now, the other side of it is the iterative nature. So what I found, and you mentioned it a minute ago, actually, was where you were really battling with it because it was coming back with hallucinations depending on the various different considerations it was making. If you had a developer sat next to you and you had given them a piece of work and they'd come back to you with that, is it any different in terms of how you QA their work and then say, right, well, that's great, but it's not adhering to this pattern here, you know? So I sort of see those parallels in the sense that, in a way, the use of vibe coding is making us build and design systems in the agile way that we should be doing anyway to get value out the door quickly. You know, I just want to go back to one.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with that, but yeah.
Okay.
You finish
Well,
your point.
the other point I was going to say is that whilst I'm saying that it needs to be grounded in the situation, right? Whether that's the business context or it's the technical context. The way the system is built today is sort of a really key part to the context that you give, you know, in your vibe or your prompt in order to build it, which I think Elements provides in a degree. Sorry, Matt.
So that bit I do agree with, right? So I think information is what it's is what it's all about, right? And I think it's not bad news. It's not all bad news, because in terms of, you know, what information can we provide, and I think it's important actually. We should differentiate between writing a computer program that maybe does a UI widget or, you know, processes a large number of records to an end-to-end business process, right? Yeah, because I think they're very different things, and I think that the emphasis needs to be applied appropriately. So, you know, I think the idea of, you know, fashion away in an agile manner, you know, on a program is probably an example with AI is an example of doing the wrong thing better, right? I think actually what we need to do is we need to get back to structure and discipline, and I think that's a contrast from the general move that we've seen over the last 15 years, which has been, I think, mostly fueled by SaaS and you know, what are now called hyperscalers, but, you know, what AWS and GCP started. You know, we need to bring back structure to this. And, you know, it's interesting because I was sort of refreshing my thinking around the TOGAF architecture framework, right? TOGAF has those layers of detail, right? You've got L1, 2, 3, and 4, where L4 is, you know, code level definitions, right? So if you have got to write a flight control system for a plane or some, tax calculation, you can actually specify exactly what that is. And you can go all the way back up to the highest level view in L1. So, the structure and the discipline and actually the skills exist to do that. And I think that, if we can gravitate back towards this kind of good structure, that's a positive. And I think then the other thing to recognize is it's kind of what you were saying about the current state of the system, Sam, right? We've got to understand what we've got because, my observation would be that a large number of organizations out there, they probably at this point don't actually know hand on heart what all of their business processes are end to end, right? Because people have had to improvise. And, that's actually a nature of business. I mean, that's how Salesforce got successful because they were flexible, because they recognized that businesses change. But if you don't know what you want to be doing, and then you've got the next challenge of, well, what have we actually got configured at the moment? Because what is the difference? Is it what we think we're doing? Is it what's configured? And actually, at this point in time now, the ground has shifted. And so what we actually need to do is define what it is that we need, and then calculate how we're going to cross the delta.
Mm. So couple of thoughts here as well. I know that in recent years there's been a bit of pushback against Agile as a methodology approach, because I think in practice people adopted it as a no documentation, no spec, no analysis, let's get going. And I think now with vibe coding tools, now also creeping into the Salesforce world, we'll probably see even more. Let's just start vibing.
Can I not say though? I think that a lot of stuff that's been created in the Salesforce world, we've had such a great fun time, and we've had lots of furry animals, and everybody's been empowered to build. So it wasn't called vibe coding, but we figured out how we were going to do that workflow rule or that formula or that flow, or even a bit of Visual Force or Apex, right? I mean, there's a fair amount of that out there.
So quick question, and you both alluded to this, to elements on once or twice. So I wanted to ask, there's been, you said 15 years through different tools, declarative, now AI, more almost emphasis of giving power to, sounds very revolutionary, power to the people. to actually, you don't have to be a programmer, you don't have to have a formal 5 or 7 or however many years of IT education. You can get started, you can learn this, you can build something, some automation, some systems, applications for the business fairly quickly. Whereas I think the skill set, the tool set, the insights required to do proper analysis, architecture have been still, that required work, that required expertise. That's why architects are so few compared to developers and admins. Do you think, for instance, with Elements Office now with process configuration mining, where you ask, how does something work in my org, and here's the blueprint of how it's configured with all the ugliness of it, all the tech debt. Is that something that actually, just like vibe coding and before that declarative automations made it more accessible for non-devs to start building? Is that something that makes it more accessible for more people to actually do architecture, to do business analysis? And
I think it's more fundamental than that. I've been working on what I refer to as advanced tooling, for the last few years, right, as a topic. And when you guys launched process configuration mining, I think I upset Ian a little bit. Sorry, Ian, where I said this could have been created at any point in the last decade, and it could. All the APIs were there. You could get the information. Was there a business driver? Was anybody actually asking, what processes have I got configured? What's in my Salesforce org? They weren't. So it wasn't a criticism that should have created it sooner. Although I would have dearly loved to have had that 10 years ago. It is much needed now, and it's not just in terms of enabling people to be architects. It is providing access to that information, which it would just take too much time to go and get that right. And if you think about, I see too many teams. The majority of teams will do their impact analysis through queries and spreadsheets, and and for me, as somebody who started work in the pre-Java era, right, where tooling was what it was all about, and you would have impact analysis tooling built into these modeling environments. I've been waiting for it to come back again. So I'm very happy to see it, and it's necessary, I think, for people to recognise that you can't just use Visual Studio Code and Dev Console, and that's the only tooling that we need, right? We've bought Salesforce. That's everything we need. It's not. We've got to return to actually understanding what is it that we've got, and only when we understand what it is that we've got through doing effective impact analysis, if we want to try and remediate, some technical debt. Although I think mostly at this point in time, it's a lost cause, and I think we really ought to be looking at wholesale modernization and migration strategies, because actually the underlying architecture needed to service AI, is fundamentally different from what we've got. We've built a bunch of silos, really, across whether it's sales or service, and everybody's tried to reach for the customer 360, for the last decade plus. Now it's here, right? The potential is here, and the platform features within Salesforce, some of the features within Data Cloud are absolutely critical to making this happen, right? Data Cloud 1, for example. But, it means that we do have to make a shift probably over the next, decade. The work of the next decade is really to make that shift, right? So this is kind of go back to my earlier point about sort of what's the social effects of AI. The technology is absolutely mind-blowing, but it will take time to percolate through, and not least because it's got to percolate through organizations, and it's going to take absolutely everybody. And I think that, maybe to address your question about is it empowering people to be architects? I think it's empowering anybody who understands how their business ought to run, or wants to find inefficiency and drive it out. I think that's what it drives. I don't think you need a computer science degree to be able to do that. And equally, I don't think we should have stayed with people, needing to be software engineers to touch a computer, because we would not have had the transformation for digital over the last 2 decades. So, it's an imperfect world, but I think information, and as much of it as we can get is really critical to progress.
Yeah. Sort of to add to that, but in a slightly different way. So there's 2 things that I think are more prevalent these days because the technology enables it. So in direct answer to your question, does it enable non-technical folks to be taking on bigger roles? I'm sort of paraphrasing what you said.
That's the spirit.
And I think, but it does. But it comes from the need for that comes from an expectation or a trend where the technology is setting up an expectation where our time to value is much shorter, and that our business side is more aligned to the technology side, or the IT side, if you will. To date, we've sort of had people occupying those roles, right? Whether it's an architect, that's one of their primary functions, whether it's a solution architect or a business architect or or an enterprise architect, less so on the technical side because that's towards the other end of the spectrum. But one of their primary roles is bridging the gap between the business and the technology to make sure that we're able to deliver, or the business is able to deliver those strategic goals and transform the business. And because that expectation is there and change is accelerating, the expectation to deliver value is also accelerating, and the time to do so is getting shorter. The tools that enable us to do that are the ones that provide us with the intelligence, right? And by looking at what you've got, I want to create this distinction actually, is that brownfield implementation, so what I mean by that, for those who don't know, is an existing implementation of technology. It acts as like a blueprint of how the business currently works, right? Not necessarily accurately, though. And I guess that's where the value in configuration mining is, because you can say, based on the configuration, this is how the business works, and that creates a differential between what the perception and how people actually operate the business versus how the technology supports the way the business works. the gap is where change needs to happen, because it may not be the most efficient way on either side. In contrast, though, with a situation where you've got a greenfield implementation, it's far more in that creative camp where you've got to gather a lot of information about how you want the business to work, but you don't actually have an implementation to use as the blueprint for that. Equally, though, where the challenge is less so in the gap over in the brownfield world, but more so in I've got a ton of information that I need to gather in discovery. I need to analyze it. I need to crystallize that, and the output needs to be a set of requirements that I can then use with vibe coding or my delivery team or whatever to actually deliver that change. And again, the tooling, the technologies are enabling that to be faster and easier to identify. So I think, just coming back to the question around, does it enable people to take more responsible roles? Yes, but necessarily so.
There's two things you both mentioned before we came here. In your intro, you said, we've been in Salesforce ecosystem for a long time, but my God, things are changing so quickly. You wouldn't probably be able to tell exactly how things exactly work with everything. And just before we came here, you said, you're still catching up on everything that's being announced for Dreamforce. And I want to, in that context, talk a bit more about this, again, the blueprint concept that we've been alluding to. It's quite interesting. In the last 2 years, me and my wife have been building a house so my family can move in. We have a second baby on the way, so we need more space. And as someone in IT, was working with the builders, there was a lot of parallels between our world. But what I found interesting is no contractor agrees to touch a single thing in the house until they see the blueprints.
Yeah.
And I found it fascinating because in software, we touch the stuff all the time without seeing the blueprints.
Not in production.
No.
That's interesting. I mean, that's interesting.
And I found that, and I think you both said the fact that through configuration mining and other tools in the future, you might get that blueprint on demand as you start working. I can see how that accelerates that work. But sorry, you had comment before mine.
So hot topics right now. So obviously the consulting world is being disrupted by this, right? And it's really that opportunity for, I think, what gets termed as new commercial models, right? So if we're not sure about what's going on, we're going to be risk averse, and a Salesforce SI is going to go out of business very quickly if they just take on all the risk, because there's always landmines and things jumping out at you. So it's highly problematic. Even a sort of a service cloud, install, right? It's not without its challenges. So I think that the Salesforce ecosystem has sort of been predominantly, in its early days, you could get sort of a fixed initial implementation, but it was very prescriptive, right? And anything beyond that, is kind of work order, it is time and materials, right? And I think that the AI offers something, to businesses of all types, which actually I think is to alleviate risk, right, or to mitigate risk, because if you think about the cycle times with our existing development techniques, you're looking at stuff, it's usually sort of measured in at least days, probably weeks. If we bring that down to hours, let's not get into the minutes craziness, but if we bring that down to hours, then a misstep might not be quite so consequential, right? So it can then be the opportunity that it's possible to offer some sort of commercial model that is not just time and materials, right? And actually but it's a contract, right? As all contracts, there's two sides to it, which is, and I think we're going to need to address this actually, because we're going into a situation where we don't know everything, right? So you were doing the unknown unknowns, your quotes earlier, and I think that there's a shared responsibility, between organizations and partners that deliver, or individuals who deliver, to kind of be more collaborative on this. And that for me we mentioned Agile earlier. That kind of goes back to the spirit of what Agile was rather than what Agile has become, right? Which is, it's people taking responsibility. And actually, I mean, that's how I've often described, what an architect is for aspiring architects, right? So not necessarily a job title. It's more about, are you taking on that responsibility for the architecture and, the different facets of that. So it's, it is really, everything is up for grabs right now. I think everything is in flux, right? Whether it be commercial models, whether it is who does what jobs, how do we do those jobs?
Is it? Sorry.
There is a constant though, right? Which is, and I love the building analogy when it comes to architecture, because it's, I would use it on a daily, weekly basis, because it is, there's a lot of parallels, as you said. I don't, and I do think everything's up for grabs, but I don't. One thing hasn't changed, and that is just sort of touching on one of the points you made earlier about the structure. So coming back to having more structure, we have, in good architectural practices, in good design practices, in good delivery and transformation practices, we have some structure already, and typically that's good structure provided by governance, guardrails, standards, and so on. And you're right, we need to get back to that. It becomes more prominent when we've got a situation where we are perhaps not touching in production. I can't even entertain that sort of building analogy, right? But when we're making changes, creating net new capability for the business in technology terms, whether it's vibe coding or not, good practice ensures that it's adhering to the architectural design, technical and business principles and integration principles that have already been set out. And even Salesforce are now, with their announcements at Dreamforce, focusing more on the governance of agents, the observability of agents, because whilst we've now got a capability to use, we need to make sure that we're using it in the right way, and it's acting and behaving in the right way. So I think, to your point about, yes, we are making changes more rapidly, but you can't do that without also improving and reaffirming the application of those guardrails. And
there's a virtuous circle here, right? Because what does work well, and I did this recently, right? I took our Apex coding standards, and if you ground an agent with that, it's like turning on a light, right? And so even though we should, and we probably did, I'm sure, have governance and guardrails, and they were always adhered to, in the past. Well, now actually, if you're building a cycle which involves a good proportion of generative AI, then that's all positive, right? Because you're likely to have better interpretation of the standards, certainly a better articulation of what the trade-offs and the considerations are going to be, and therefore you can make your final choice. And with that information in hand, it can then proceed, to say, well, this is what it looks like, right? Whatever it is that's being generated. But I just want to make this one point, right, which is because this example was provided to me by a colleague on a call this morning. We were talking, exactly this kind of conversation. This is really all we talk about right now, right? And he was pointing out that he'd just been on a project where they were looking to make use of Agentforce agents, and it's within a context where it's consumer products, that could have allergens in it. So people need to know they might contact the manufacturer's helpline or whatever that's on the back of the box and say what's in this, right? And if they give the wrong answer, well, that's bad news. Now, ingredients do change, right? That's a challenge, and the ingredients are listed within the ERP system of record, system of production. So it's it couldn't be any more true. And he said, when we actually tracked it through end to end, we actually found what they were doing were a JSON message would be coming out of the ERP system. into Salesforce. Salesforce would then be turning that into a PDF, and then that PDF would get put in the knowledge base, and then we were going to put the knowledge base, and make the knowledge base available for the agent. Well, hang on a minute. Actually, everything gets a lot more simple if we can just cut out those intermediate steps. Those intermediate steps only existed because a person needed to search for it in a knowledge base and then read out what was on the screen, or put it in an email to the person who was making the inquiry. Yeah. So the opportunity to simplify, as long as you can apply common sense, and as one of my architect mentors once said to me, common sense ain't so common. So that's always going to remain a challenge for us humans. But there is lots of benefit to be had in the short term. Whatever the state of everything else in your systems, if you can look to spot these areas of inefficiency or insanity and address them, I think is an excellent stopgap measure in terms of starting to create value from the opportunities that exist. Because we're not going to stop the world whilst we reorganize everything, are we? We've never been able to do that. So I don't want it to sound like there's we've got to re-engineer absolutely everything. We don't. I think the most significant thing we need to re-engineer actually is our outlook as to what can be changed, right? Or how do we do things?
So on that note, and I'm going to slightly challenge you on, nothing gets built in production without a blueprint. Some civil comment like that earlier. You've used configuration mining on a project for a customer on a case object, I believe. Yeah. We have used it ourselves internally once. The big reveal internally was when I showed our operations team our opportunity management process. And it's quite interesting. Our team has always had a blueprint, but turns out they never had the blueprint. So what I mean by that, when I showed the diagram, the output of configuration mining, which is this is how we manage our opportunities. The feedback from the entire team, first comment was, that's all wrong. Mm-hmm. And I thought, shit, I built something that is not right. Because they said, why there are 7 ways to create opportunities? I said, well, because there are 7 ways to create opportunities. No, the only way is this screen flow. And what are all these resources? Well, these are all the people who can edit and create opportunities and move them through the workflow. I said, no, that's only salespeople can do that. And I went into our production org and, sure enough, there was this quick action, and I'm on the product profile. I created the opportunity. I was moving it all the way to close and said, clearly not, as you can see. And I think it was this issue of they had a blueprint. They were able to design with stakeholders how they want the process to work. What they were missing was the understanding of what was built before. They're not building on a green field. Yep. They're building on a brown field, and whatever you build is on top of everything that was built before. Mm-hmm. Funny enough, they decided to remove all the ways to create opportunities, including related lists from God knows how many related objects. And they thought everything is now clean, people will use the screen flow. The entire sales team went up in arms because I can't create opportunities anymore. You have a screen flow. What screen flow? Never used it. I always use related lists. So it was a great example of what the team thought they built versus what the people were using or what the system
it's
did.
It's the meme with the swing and the tree, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody rolled that out.
By the time you got to the 6th picture,
it never changes.
And I think this is exactly what you said about as your team did not using configuration mining, but did the end-to-end of between the ERP, Salesforce. Wow. If you look at the entire process, so many opportunities for how this could be optimized become clearer.
Yeah, and that's really what I was pointing to, is that gap, right, between how it actually works, how it actually operates, and whether it was supposed to do that in the first place.
Yeah.
Right? So it becomes more important clarity when you've got agents doing organisations that want to look at what is possible. Where I was listening to some of the announcements, such as Agent Fabric, Agent Visualizer, some which have gone live.
Is it Agent Fabric or is it Agent 4?
And a lot of the conversations we have with clients, where you can actually monitor, tends to be around catalog, register, and see all your agents we know across your enterprise. You want to do a POC. You can see what kinds of agents now are they MCP. There's obviously also uncertainty in terms of the workforce and so on. The advanced agent technology and what impact that's going to have. But it's not just the ones in Salesforce, our teams, so that's the sort of picture that's being drawn. Teams in general, and the focus is on certainly applying governance developers through observability. So the visualizer this time next year, I hope there's more clarity looking at in where
in
the
the
issues
same way as you would with
within
an
businesses,
LLM,
for example, you need to
whether it be
evaluate
technical or non-technical,
how it responds,
so
to
that businesses
a
can
spectrum
be
of prompts to
more
make sure
targeted
that it's doing what it's meant to do.
they
It's
can
giving accurate
transform,
results back,
not at the
individual
tune
use
that
case
and
and
the
the
prompts that you
but at
use to
the
make sure that it's accurate.
same thing with agents,
macro,
though.
business strategy,
With an agent in an integration
transformation
domain
perspective
that is responsible for calling out to
it's
APIs,
clearer,
for example,
how AI is,
but you
helping,
are
perhaps
augment
in a
multi-agent
people's
scenario.
skills,
You're simply
so that
starting
there's
the
actually the
process
balance
and
between
it is
the
doing
human and the
something
technology,
without
more when it comes to
the
agents.
governance
we're
being
actually
applied
working
to the
together
prompts
a lot closer.
How do you make sure that the agents are doing what they should be doing in the same way as your users are using the system as it was intended to be used? And that comes down to being able to observe what actually happened with that agent, or how the users are actually using the system, how the system is actually built, and comparing it to what was the intent at the very beginning. And I think by mining how it's actually working gives you that insight to say, well, this is either working as expected or it's not.
Remember, it was well architected earlier this year. We ran together a workshop for architects, and it was actually fairly simple concept. Here's a process diagram of some hypothetical imaginary company, and it was a fairly simple process. It was like only 12 steps or something like that. And I mentioned this in the context of exactly what you said of how important is that understanding of the process to then learn how to apply agents and what agents to apply. Actually, not every AI you can apply is necessarily an agent. And the premise of the workshop of you have this process, but you can certain tasks, certain jobs should be done by humans. Certain are perfectly done. They're very deterministic. Keep to your flows, Apex, or whatever. Don't bring AI into this. Some are simple AI automation. Some probably better as conversational back and forth, or even autonomous agents. And it's quite interesting because people talk about agents, but I think you and I found during that workshop that even on a simple 12-step process, it takes actually a lot of time and thinking and analysis to figure out where and how AI could actually be applied and bring value, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that is the value, right? So there's so many good points being raised. So look, we spoke a little bit about what the business model might be, what the commercial model might be, right? And one of those things is what's a good agent, or what's a good application of AI within this part of my business, right? That has potentially a huge amount of value if you can understand what that is. Now, actually building it, how long does it take you to build an Agentforce agent, Sam? Not very long.
Not very
right?
long. To test it and to make sure it's accurate
testing remains a challenge, but I think that's going to improve.
Isn't that, by the way, Palantir's business model? In that, I'm not quite sure on the details of it because that's not necessarily my area, but isn't their model, we're going to scope, find out agent use cases, and we're not necessarily charging when we deploy our forward deployed engineers, we're not necessarily charging by the hour, by how much time they will spend. Rather, we are charging by the value you will get from those agents.
And this is sort of the quid pro quo for moving to a consumption model from a Salesforce point of view, right? You can't move to a consumption-based pricing model, right? Credits, whether it's for data or for AI, without actually better understanding the value. Now, Salesforce, as they grew their business, were really good at articulating the value to the people that they sold to. But I think, remember where that started. That started out in sort of the realms of shadow IT. They'd be selling directly to the business. They'd be selling to the sales guy who's got access to some money, or the marketing guy who's got access to some money. And before you knew it, IT had to take Salesforce seriously because there was a big enough footprint in the estate. And that's where we see over the last 8-9 years, right, the kind of governance coming in, with the MuleSoft acquisition as well. Very much more controls needed about the estate. It was no longer that you had, your Salesforce, applications as being sort of, tactical, being sort of departmental. They became strategic and enterprise, right? And then we tried to reach for the customer 360 to get the value. And I think that, this kind of growing up is kind of reaching new heights, I think, with what you were describing about the agent fabric and the observability and understanding exactly what's going on. if you sort of wind back, the sales team implemented their own Salesforce, they made their own rules and they rolled it out, right? Yeah. And that was back in the day where you actually Sandbox was extra, so it probably was in production, guys. There was probably still professional edition, right? And there was no Sandbox. We couldn't be further away from that now, right? In terms of what's at stake, right? Thinking about, sort of this, I kind of sort of visualize this humming machine which represents a business, right? So rather sort of sci-fi conceptual, but it's starting to sort of feel that way. But we can do it, right? And I'll tell you why. When Agentforce came out, I was riding back home from dropping my daughter to school, and there was some works going on next to the canal where I live in Bristol, right? And what I saw was, hang on a minute. That's the National Grid building there, and then there's the canal, and then there's the rest of the city over there. So all of these pipes and cables, that must be a lot of very important infrastructure that carries power to the city. And I talked to some of our field service team about this, right? Because it really fascinated me, because we do a lot of field service work, right, around utilities, companies and stuff like that. And, the parallel I would draw with what we need to do for agents is, in what you see in GIS, in geographical information systems, right, in your country, in your city. Somebody wants to dig up a road. How do they know that there's a gas main there or there isn't, right? All of that information is well managed, and if it wasn't well managed, we'd probably know about it, right? Because there'd be water leaks and gas explosions much more frequently, right? And why do we want to avoid water leaks and gas explosions? Well, they're highly destructive. This is the stakes we're talking about, and costly, right? This is the stakes we're talking about now when it comes to, well, look at the potential with this AI stuff. Great, okay.
I love how we keep going back to the building or the infrastructure analogy, because actually to that
to
point,
the physical world, yeah.
They've connected water to my yet-to-be-finished house some time ago. And literally the next day when I went online, I could see in the online repository of whatever, the plan of that house, and the line was now drawn.
Yeah.
It wasn't there 2 days ago, and now there was. The blueprints of
Been updated.
that have been updated, and it's almost live. And I think it's quite interesting to say that in the IT world, we're lacking something that the general government bureaucracy probably has had access to for a while, which is this automatic self-updating blueprints of.
Well, it's not self-updating though. I think that's the thing,
sorry.
right? Which
It's
is, we might
constantly updated by humans. So,
well, and it has to be, right? And some of that actually is enshrined in law, right? Such as the seriousness of it, right? So I don't know what's going to happen with AI, but I think it is. This need to understand, I guess it's, with great power comes great responsibility, right? I mean, the power as exponentially increased in just a couple of years. Okay, how are we responding to that from a responsibility point of view?
You just reminded me of when we're talking about needing to know how things work, and before the technology gets to a point where we can actually interrogate it and say, right, well, how is it built? What did it do? Things like that. You had that. You heard the tree phrase, right? Which is if a tree falls in the forest, right?
Yeah.
So it sort of applies to this in that if you don't know what your agent did or how your org is configured, did it really do it? Is it really built that way? Do your users really use it that way? Are they really getting the benefit that you expect? And it sort of comes down to yes, we need to keep updating our blueprint in whatever shape that takes, but we can't get away from the fact that we're sort of moving away from the patterns of, right, I'm going to draw everything up, I'm then going to build it, people are going to use it, and then I'm just going to expect that those two things are the same. There's too much variability in that, and there's too much risk and cost involved in assuming that is the case. So I think we're now in a situation where we need to be more accurate with what is actually being built and how is that actually changing to serve the business.
So this is a live and very hot issue right now, right? We haven't talked about it yet. I don't know why, right? Security.
Yeah.
Salesforce security, right?
Absolutely.
it's super hot right now, right? Everybody's talking about it. In fact, clients' phone's been ringing off the hook, email box has been filling up.
But it's because people don't know how their security
they're not
posture
they're
and
not confident
surface is
they're not confident in how is my Salesforce configuration
secure.
applied, in terms of security. Who can see what?
So
right?
you made a comment very early on, or maybe it was you, about tech debt accumulated in the orgs, and I think you made a comment. It's probably too late to do anything about that. And in that context about security, I remember, I've always wondered, tech debt seems to be something every org has. Some of it is very, very bad. No one ever seems to feel the urgency to do anything about it. When we generated the process for our own opportunity management, and it showed all the people, all the profiles, all the permissions, like anyone who, it turns out the entire business, including probably our VP's doc, anyone could just do whatever because of all the copied permissions, whatnot. I never saw that team go up and fix permissions. That it was almost straight and go product, just take off these permissions of people right now. Mm-hmm. It was quite interesting. It's one thing to talk about tech debt in isolation. When people see whether that's their automations or permissions and the mess and what they do and don't do in context of the business process they care about and the business process that is fundamental to the business, all of a sudden this becomes top priority. I never saw them running around fixing things that quickly before.
If you can't see it, then how do you govern it or improve it or change it?
Yeah. Or if you don't have time, only have time to have a little look at a part of it, right? I'm changing this part of the system. I've looked, in the areas slightly around it, and we're that's what that's the limit of our impact analysis and our our regression testing, right? And I think here's an example of the power and the potential of AI, which is you could be applying these things constantly. You could be applying checks constantly to your Salesforce org, right? We're talking about Salesforce orgs. And, I set a vision, a few months ago, which I kind of felt like a bit of an imposter saying this because I'm like, I should just say this and see what people say, right? But I think, within as soon as 12 months time, and maybe even sooner, we won't be going into the setup menu, right? No. And actually, there's an argument to say, we shouldn't really be going into the setup menu and tinkering with the FLS on the opportunity object and, and especially, if you think about all the different ways that you can control that access, including helpful, but, helpful features which multiply complexity though, right? Such as let's have a muting permission set.
Restriction rules.
And all of it. And you're like, whoa. How actually would we even expect a human to kind of visualize that in any reasonable amount of time, and even if it was full time, even if it was 10 people full time, right? Isn't there a better way to do it? And this is where my experience with AI tells me, just give it the metadata, give it the data, and it will.
Give it a very well constructed prompt and instruction.
Well, that's right. I mean, and your test cases, which were very, very. I'm very pleased with the way that it does generate user stories and acceptance criteria and the associated test acceptance criteria and the test conditions that go with it, right? That's, it's almost like, why are we not describing the systems rather than trying to configure them? And I think when we to go back to the early conversation about code, why are we even writing programs, right? Why, we're not writing machine code anymore. We're not writing assembler, in any large amounts anymore. Why not? We're not even writing in C. So, if we think about those layers of abstraction over the bare metal, we probably need to embrace, the power that's here so that we can take another step up and describe a model rather than try and configure.
Yeah, I'd agree.
In that case, first of all, I would like to get your reaction on something. In the general context of AI and Salesforce, we touched on process configuration mining from elements. When we were talking about the agent finding exercise, I forgot to mention we now in the product also have ability to click a magical button and find all those agents in the process. So you're now in a position to generate any part of your org as a blueprint, as a process of how this works, with the tech debt permissions, all the ugliness of it. clean it up, and find agents in that context of that process. And we did that. We actually launched a agent, when I mentioned this case to bug. And to your point, I think it took 7 days, the entire project, but 2 days of actual building and testing the agent was not that complex. And we, within a month, we've decreased the time to resolution by eight times. Like we had quality of documentation nearly at 100% against the standard, just almost immediate effect, and was all apply agent here. This box could use this. It's like, okay, let's give it a go. Now, one thing about Elements historically has been that we've been a rather pricey product, very much enterprise, geared towards enterprises, geared towards that part of the spectrum and that part of the price spectrum as well. What's your reaction when I'm going to tell you that we're actually announcing a big shift in our strategy, and we've decided rather than being just enterprise focus, we're going to try to be a very democratic tool, fundamentally throw our playbook out the window, start again. We actually plan to provide all of our capabilities, including configuration mining, agent finding, not to mention all the other metadata analysis we provide with syncing and org, to anyone. Anyone can start for free, and actually the only paid tier for self-service is around $100 a user a month, just to make it completely accessible, even if you're an admin in a small org or an enterprise. Just
take my money.
Yeah.
Take my
He's
money.
already getting his wallet out.
Take my money, guys. I mean, look, I've already said that. I've already said that we can't do it with the in quotes free tools. The tools come out the box with Salesforce. You can't do it, right? And there's so much to do that you can't do it by hand. That's for sure. So, yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of demand there, and I think it's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to comment on your commercial model, but in terms of what you're actually talking about there is pretty much all of what we just talked about, which is putting intelligence in the hands of people more readily. I mean, the more accessible that is, we all benefit. I always say that part of what I do as an architect in the Salesforce ecosystem and community is because I want to help the overall ecosystem sort of be better, be enabled to to deliver better, to make decisions better, to help where because I guess, and I'll be totally honest here, is somewhat self-serving. That's the sort of ecosystem I want to be in. That's the sort of people that I want to be working with, right? It's also the sort of environment that I want our clients to benefit from and our people to benefit from is a much more informed and intelligent and purposeful and deliberate and value-added set of skills. So if Elements provides that in an easier way, then absolutely fantastic.
I mean, look, I think it's got huge potential, right? I've always been a fan of what Elements has done, even from the beginning, right? To the point of, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I had that idea, right? But that doesn't build a business. An idea doesn't build a business. And after talking with the team, it's great engineering behind the scenes as well, right? So that's cool. I think that we keep mentioning process configuration mining. You talk about the agent, visualizer and designing agents. I think all that's great, but even something as fundamental as where's this field used, right? Or if I add a pick list value to this field, what else do I need to look at? That has an incredible amount of value, which I'm sure somebody could put a number to, but that always remains then the problem, right? Which is you then get into these protracted discussions about, does somebody want to hand over, whatever amount of money per year, per month, whatever. But I think that, maybe a more applicable currency, if there is such a metric, is how much friction can we reduce, right? So if even with those, those absolutely mundane examples of so and so's asked, can we have a pick list, another pick list value? Guess what? There's no space on the pick list value. The object limits are maxed out, so some of the other ones are going to have to go. Which ones can go? Which ones can go? That's a 3-week project.
Well, traditionally it is.
Right.
But with the right tooling,
With the right tooling,
like
that
a few
is
days or a week or something.
exactly. You can give the estimate back, the next day, and then it can be scheduled into the backlog. We're actually returning to a genuinely agile approach there, rather than sort of the business getting frustrated because they're asking for something, and the answers that they're getting back is 5 reasons why it can't be done.
So not to be completely, I will be completely self-serving here, and apologies.
Yeah,
but
it's your podcast. So
yeah,
go for it.
like config mining agent stuff aside, what you're describing is actually the very core of elements.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've been very proud of, and what is actually the source of all of those things we've been discussing, is the way we've been approaching metadata and dependencies in Salesforce and mining them. We don't just do, this metadata, let's say this field, is used in these flows and Apex and whatever. We actually go as far as to mine and capture how it's used. So actually, I remember there was a great example using elements, but that was like 5-6 years ago when we had dependency trees. We could map it out. It was all just this is used here. End of story. We had a big transformation again around opportunity object. We were changing our general lifecycle approach. And whilst our admin at the time found that there were 21 flows that obviously relate in some way to the stage opportunity field, it took him the entire day, 8 or 9 hours of going flow by flow and figuring out what is it that they actually do with that one field. And that was just the analysis before any work was done.
So that is actually achievable, right? So and they proved it right because they did it. So you
No, but wait, the story was that was 8-9. That was 5 years ago, but
Yeah.
it was 8 to 9 hours of analysis. Not particularly agile. We actually had a lot of customers over the years who weirdly said, we were always supposed to be change intelligence to help people say yes to change. A lot of our customers love the tool because they said it allows them to say no to change, because all they have to do is visualize big dependency tree, show it to a salesperson and say,
No, you can't have that field.
and that's why. And people say, back off. And I always thought I have fundamental problem with that, because that's not that's not the behavior we were supposed to be enabling. But when we, over the course of many years, we've made that mining much easier. This is now at the point where you go to the same field, and now, whilst you see all the 327 reports using this field, a lot of work. Unless I roll the dice, and hopefully no one will notice that something broke. But you can actually go, where is this field used as a filter or a grouping? Because if it's a column, quite frankly, the impact probably not that big. Filter 8. I can do 8 reports. I can change that in the next 15 minutes. 362 reports feels intimidating. There are 27 flows. I'm sweating. But where is it used as a start condition? And on this particular pick list value, which one is using this pick list value? Actually, it's only 3. Oh, not that scary after all. It's only 2 record triggered flows with start condition and something that actually, that's a 15-minute work. And actually, this all people started going, actually, this is not even 10 times as difficult as I thought it's going to be. Based because
I think the more you can tell people what they need to do, right? If it's a human, and I guess this sort of then flows into the how we were talking about grounding and prompting agents, doesn't it? If you can be more specific about what needs to happen, that's a good thing. That's a necessary thing. I don't know if you want to say something. Sam.
I was just going to say,
I do have another observation as well.
What you're essentially saying is that you're enabling people to see more, and it goes back to what I was saying before: is if you can't see it, then how do you change it? By making them see, helping them to see it, it becomes easier to actually make the change, improve it, and
I mean, I guess would it be true that through experience you've heard enough of people's the next question that comes up when you show them that, then they say, well, okay, my next question is. You've now anticipated what all those next questions are to the point that it's kind of no further questions, right? And there is okay, I can see what I need to do. So that's absolutely.
So I wasn't planning.
powerful.
I wasn't planning on making that announcement here, but whilst this year's big thing for us has been the configuration mining, I've been saying to Richard and our co-founders for a year, if you like this, you're going to love the next one even more, because what allows us to draw these diagrams automatically from your org is because we we fundamentally know the pipework of how everything is related to everything else. And whilst we use AI to interpret and generate this view, we don't get all of the context of the org, and we don't have to read 100,000 Apex classes. We know the 3 classes that actually matter in this context and the 2 flows that actually are relevant to your question before any AI gets applied. So we can squeeze the context to just the relevant stuff and then interpret. But the same pipework allows us now to, and we're working on it, and I'm not sure exactly when it will be released, but maybe hopefully by the end of the year, is you've got a ticket, a question, I want to do this. Click the proverbial magic button, interpret it, and go, okay, so you're going to touch this metadata. These are the things you could how do you want to approach this? They're based on well-architected 3 ways you could build this. Well, let's use this one. Okay, if you're going to do this, this is going to be the impact. You'll need to do this. You'll need to delete that. You'll need to modify this. And also, do you want to do it properly? Or do you want to leave a bit of technical debt behind and get it done a bit faster? There are 2 options. So that kind of, this is everything you need to do. Now,
so
off you go.
I guess
it's in the works
that
already.
sounds great, right? Almost a feed into an instruction set, right? I guess the consideration there is if you've got something like vibe coding actually built into AI Cody or Dev Cody, whichever, and it's also being used in MuleSoft as well. The same thing, I believe. Is how do you bridge the gap between those 2 things? Because what Dev Cody says when you give it a prompt, how is that different to what's actually been? Because both are grounded in in the metadata, right? So
metadata is key. So I've been exploring with Copado as well around their generative capabilities, and comparing it to, okay, how does this compare to GitHub Copilot, for example, right? Because it's essentially the same engine, right? You've got Gen AI with some LLM, but it's the metadata, right? And I remember. Salesforce in Dreamforce keynotes have always mentioned the metadata, and they're right to, right? It's it's got a huge amount of value, and it's one of the things which I think having it so readily available, although those of you that work in metadata tools might disagree it's readily available, is you have to jump through hoops to get what you want to get, but you can, apart from the quote template and PDF, which people still use, pretty much everything's supported. So having that metadata aware tool, right? Whether it's an analysis tool or a generation tool, that then just removes a whole bunch of unnecessary copy paste. So that that sort of tool chain, whether it's coming from an ISV or coming from Salesforce, it's inevitably got to be the future. And it brings me back to saying, should we be going into the setup menu? Will we need to go into the setup menu? What are we actually going to ask people to do? Right? What is their role? Is it clicking checkboxes, on a list of 300 checkboxes, or is it actually things which are much more purposeful? Because there is no shortage of work to do.
That purposeful comment is, I think, the difference, right? Because whilst Dev Cody can come up with what it plans to build, it doesn't have the context of the process, right? It doesn't have the context of what the requirements were originally, unless it's connected to, I guess, Salesforce DevOps and so on.
Unless the developer has provided that grounding in that context, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I guess that's where the differentiator is. There's an opportunity there.
I think even with, I often use Gemini and ChatGPT as
to see the difference.
With the same question sometimes, and I like to put them against each other. But to your point, I've noticed whenever I ask a very generic, a very open, a very succinct question, in terms of very open, I would get often completely different takes. But when I have a very specific prompt, it almost doesn't matter which one I use, because the answers within 98% pretty much along the same lines.
I use a couple of techniques, right? One which is kind of persona based, and one which I would sort of describe as meta prompting, right? So with meta prompting, you don't ask it what you want to ask it, you ask it how would I ask you what I want to ask you,
Yeah.
right? So so write me a better prompt, right? And you were just talking about ChatGPT, Gemini Smackdown. It's quite entertaining actually to get them to write prompts for each other, to see where they go. The persona one as well, I think, is interesting, right? Where actually I built a virtual team, right? Because I'm not a particularly analytical person, right? I'm much more sort of creative type, right? So I often miss important details. So I'm like, yeah, find me, imagine you are, right? Your name is, you're going to be my COO, and your background is, you've got an MBA and all this, and you've worked at these places, right? And there's enough out there to the point that there's some people I watch on like I'll come up on YouTube and I'll be like, there's this sort of portly guy that I see on YouTube a lot, right, called Rory Sutherland. He's like a marketer type thing, or a bit raconteur, right? Yeah, I mean, he's in everybody's feed, right?
Yeah, all of a sudden,
I invited a virtual Rory to come for coffee and advise me and my team on, and there's enough of people's, essence out there that actually, but it's a great way to kind of have those richer prompts, however you get to them. Right?
But isn't Google's Notebook LM this actually like step above Gemini and ChatGPT, where you can
gives you that structure.
You can give it, here are the YouTube videos, here's the context.
Yes.
That's now what you're using. And then actually I've done this with a lot of people I haven't seen any of their writing, but a lot of videos, and you put a bunch of their videos into the context and think like them. Whoa.
And so if you apply that kind of thought process to how do we create business applications, right, rather than flight control systems, right? How do we create, data processing and business systems? Maybe there's a change of approach there, right? Which is, which I would sort of, describe an example like this, right? Which is,
let's user-centered design.
Well,
in a lot of ways, it's prompts.
It is, right, and domain driven, right, because you can ground it with all of these structures, right. Kind of goes back to those echoes of, well, look, we've got the architecture frameworks we need, we've got these other things, and I think this is kind of what I was going to say in a roundabout kind of a way. You were kind of much more into it, right, which is we get hung up with, okay, I prompted this Apex code and it didn't come out exactly like I would have written it. But does that mean that the outcome is wrong, or are you just objecting to it didn't write it like you would write it?
Yeah.
And so why don't we take that point of friction out, and instead, we wrap more information around it? And you say, well, then how do I know that it did what I wanted it to do? And this is where we're back now to observability, agent fabric. So the layers of abstraction, right, or the degrees of abstraction actually change. We're not looking at, let's look at the code metrics. Let's put it through. Is it scoring right?
Yeah.
From a unit test point of view, is it working right? Well, what's the unit now?
Yeah. Sort of one thing we haven't touched on is testing. Right, it's a big topic, but we talked about governance. We talked about the sort of
design
the prompt design, and actually prompts being a form of metadata in a way, or in the way you describe it,
it's like a manifestation of metadata,
exactly.
right? Yeah.
So there is that, but what we haven't talked about is testing, and that is like another key part to this. I cut whilst you. And that's not to say that it's something we've missed. It's just we haven't necessarily applied it to the testing area as much. Obviously Salesforce has the test center capability, but with things like vibe coding and making sure that the prompts are well informed in the context is king, of course, in context of the process and the personas and the business goals and the standards and the principles and everything else. You also have to give it the instructions to tell it, right, well, and I also need this to be testable. I also need it to include a robust test set of criteria in a testing framework and. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to validate that it is actually delivering the value.
I mean, this, I think this is what the thing that I wrap up with, under the sort of the banner of advanced tools and the software development lifecycle, right? And advanced tools isn't just how can we create more stuff quicker. It is actually that full software development lifecycle, including observability that we've never really paid much attention to. But I mentioned that because, testing is a huge part of that. I was on a call yesterday around, the banking sector and just getting an update from people who've got, our colleagues who've got loads of information about what tools are being used by what banks and, what the direction of travel is around that, right? Because it's absolutely fundamental. But here's the interesting thing, right? Whatever sector you want to refer to, you can say the same for testing. You can say the same for CI/CD. You can say the same for instrumentation and observability, and even microservices, right? API structure. Nobody's really fully done the job properly, or it's vanishingly rare that you're going to find an organization that has absolutely aced it, right? And if it is, it's probably Netflix, because they started with nothing and they like to talk about it. But these again are the points of friction we're going to come up. We might now be able to, look, I can produce Salesforce stuff that's incredibly high quality, I can knock it out, we can be making changes. Oh, hang on a minute, where's the bottleneck now? It's in testing, or it's been written in a way that's not very deployable.
Right.
And actually it's a 5-hour deployment cycle to get this metadata out there. If we can alleviate those things, we're going to be in a better place altogether.
And I think you're absolutely right. The software development lifecycle is not being automated. It's not. I mean, that's what we have done for years, right? We've automated things. The AI and agent use cases in that context, though, is providing the instrumentation for the software development lifecycle. Is providing those sort of intelligent points of analysing and giving us more feedback, and and making the job, the complex job of completing that step much quicker, so that you can.
So the example I use, it's not going to be a building one's every, sorry, right? But there is a real world comparison here, right? And so I refer to it as mechanization, right, rather than automation or even industrialization, because the parallel for me is it's the mechanization of farming. You've got one farmer and a horse and a plow and a 1 acre field, or you've got one farmer and a tractor or a combine, and 100 acres, or whatever, however you, but
it's great analogy.
everybody can appreciate that, right? And I mean, I'm sure there's a degree of automation in farming now, and that takes us down to a very dark place, doesn't it, about repairability? But we don't discover that on this podcast. but I think that's the thing, which is it's not a ploughing competition with which farmer can plough the straightest furrow with their horse. Right, you still get those around the country, right? Because it's a heritage tradition, but nobody does that in their day job. And we need to get into a place that is highly mechanized now, because I come back to just how much work's to be done, right? So you were giving us the stories, Avery, about your experiences within a relatively small business, as an ISV, but we are very, you're very Salesforce centric. It's very important to you, and you've got a fair number of users. But compared to some of the global organizations, right? I mean,
we're that smaller.
I mean, if you think about, there's one global organization I know where, and Sam probably knows who they are as well, right? And they're not alone, but their org strategy was such that actually the majority of the business lines, and there ended up being, 35 or 40 business lines, actually needing to congregate around one of these orgs, because it was where the main customer interactions happened. And so the case object particularly, absolutely blown out, to the point that nobody, because everybody, the idea was, well, we'll just have one case process, and then people can adopt that. And of course it never goes that way. And so you end up now with, people trying to cohabit in a multi-tenant environment, which, there's just not enough space. So, there's got to be, that's the size of some of the challenge. We can get into a whole story about what, future architecture is. Yeah. But, in terms of what
another podcast,
that's a whole other day, isn't it? But back to, would elements be useful? If anybody could have it, and even if they weren't using it, 8 hours a day, every day, there's a huge amount of value to be derived from that.
This, to me, is a nice way to actually wrap up a lot of things we've discussed. You mentioned a lot about unknown unknowns, designing a good prompt for any of those tools. And in the context of what you just said, actually, I recall when I review customer recordings or I'm on some of these calls enabling user with process configuration mining, it hit me a lot of customers that come to us, especially from large organizations, where there are 10, 15 years worth of development and customization around opportunities or cases or leads or whatever it might be. Their number one question is, how does the case or whatever, fill in the blank, how does this work? It's not at the level of detail where they go, okay, we know we want to get in and we will write very specific instruction for this tool to now improve this process. It's more like, we have no idea how any of this works. So we don't know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a known unknown. They know they don't know anything. So they don't even know what questions to ask for it to be better. And I think that's probably what this would allow them to do. And we're actually at the time. So what I would like to do as the final point is, what do you think, as we were discussing AI, Salesforce changes to the general CIDC, the product development, what is your hot take or hope of what the next year will bring? Where do you think we will be a year from now? Or hope we will be a year from now?
That's very unkind, Zavri. That's almost like your customer phoning up and saying, we want to know how this works. It's that kind of a general question, isn't it? Is the question like, where do I hope we might be this time next year?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I'll take that one on. I hope that where we'll be this time next year is that there has been progress at least in the circles I move in, where I sort of term us as Salesforce practitioners, in understanding how to determine how to measure the current value of a process and describe what the potential value of a AI augmented version of that might be. Because I think that I can't get away from the value question, because people are being asked to buy credits, and so the only way to kind of progress that is to have a better understanding
What
of
the process is
values.
today, how much does it cost us, what value does it produce versus what it could be if we applied AI. Is it worth the effort?
Yeah, where's the waste? Okay, what if we did it like this, for example?
Yeah, I would say probably two words would sum it up for me: clarity and confidence. So, clarity. We do quite a lot of work with organisations that want to look at what is possible, where value can be delivered by AI. Do a lot of that work. We also do a lot of prototypes, some of which have gone live, to your point earlier. And a lot of the conversations where we have with clients tends to be around, well, we just don't know. Or we think we know, but we're not sure, so we want to do a POC. Now, there's obviously also uncertainty in terms of the workforce, and the advancement of technology and what impact that's going to have on our teams, on our not our teams, but teams in general, people in general, certainly developers, as we talked about earlier. So this time next year, I hope there's more clarity in where the issues are within businesses, whether it be technical or non-technical, so that businesses can be more targeted in how they can transform, not at the individual use case level, but at the sort of macro business strategy and longer term transformation perspective. Also, hope that it's clearer how AI is helping augment our people's skills, so that there's actually the balance between the human and the technology more when it comes to agents. So we're actually working together a lot closer. And that sort of leads to the confidence. So clarity breeds confidence that we're, as a Salesforce ecosystem, as just a general populace, able to move forward with more certainty. I'm not going to say with certainty, because there's always going to be some uncertainty, but with more certainty that that we can get the value. The technology is supporting us. There's less variability, and so on and so forth. So clarity and confidence.
And on that clarity and confidence, let's finish. Thank you so much for the conversation, guys, for your input, and everyone, have a lovely day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cheers.